Right again. In the studio, it is Ann Glasgow. Ann is the Mississippi Association Nurse Practitioners President. Good morning, ma'am. How are you?
Good morning.
Always good seeing you.
Oh, you too.
Carolyn Coleman, return visit, Mississippi Associate Nurses Practitioner Vice President. We'll just say VP.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to have you. And for the first time in the studio is the treasurer of the association, Robert Ware. Robert, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
It is a pleasure. I want to talk about the nurses across the entire state, which has been big news. I did have this one thing that I wanted to touch base with, and I said I was going to squeeze it in somewhere. If you guys wanted to comment on this. We ask a lot of times in your profession, and also the doctors out there, because we did not know, we didn't have enough data to say that if you were unvaccinated, what is your, if you're unvaccinated but you get COVID, what is your immunity? So apparently in the last few days, some stats have come in on that one, and I'm sure they're not going to be definitive because things change, but here's the latest, because people were asking, if you're unvaccinated, an unvaccinated person who had a recent infection, we're still 5 times more likely to be reinfected with a coronavirus compared to those who were fully vaccinated. So that's some of the new numbers out there. So if you, and a lot of people saying, do I need to get vaccinated because I've had it and I feel like I've got the immunity? But according to this, unvaccinated people who had a recent infection were 5 times more likely to be reinfected with the coronavirus compared to those who were fully vaccinated and did not have a prior infection, according to the newly published study in the CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. So it's a little bit more than that, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on. The top topic across the state is nurses shortage. Where are we to date, and as far as the way we look across the state?
Well, I think, we're here to, number one, to congratulate or to encourage all the nurse practitioners. This next week is November the 7th through the 13th. It's Nurse Practitioners Week. And we're here to recognize them and as far as their job they've done on the front line. There are shortages in various areas. We feel like the nurse practitioners have stepped in the epidemic and been frontline providers. They have been in rural areas, impoverished areas, and in time, maybe the shortages will, diminish a little. But once again, I was reading something this morning is talking about educators, and Carolyn may be able to talk more about that. We saw an increase in nurse educators leaving the workforce, and therefore you're looking at, it was like, I want to say 62,000 to 68,000 across the United States, people who could become nurses could not have access to education for the simple reason there's not enough educators. So number one, I think there's a lot of problems out there or issues that need to be addressed nationwide in order to help look at the areas.
We're talking basically some of the teachers, professors at community colleges and also senior colleges.
Right, and Carolyn is at University of Southern.
Tell me exactly, is it just because a lot of them are boomers and they're retiring, or what's the problem there?
I think we have some that are retiring, but a lot of the educators now are going back into practice because they can
make a lot more money.
Yes, making a whole lot more money, so they're going back into practice. So
if I saw a nurse leaving the teaching profession and then they go to the mall or somewhere and buy some new luggage, I figure they're going to be traveling.
They're probably about to travel.
Well, and the other thing was there was a shortage of nurses prior to COVID. COVID then just kind of exacerbated that problem, because then you saw people retiring from the profession earlier than they normally might have, and then you have those that are leaving the profession because it is a challenging, grueling profession. Think about why we like to celebrate nurse practitioners is they can fill dual roles in a lot of places. They can serve as educators, they can serve as providers, and many of them do that simultaneously, which is really great and which makes it a great profession. And that's why we like to celebrate these practitioners so much, is because they are flexible. They can do things simultaneously and fill 2 roles, which is great for our profession.
Is that trend also continuing in Mississippi as far as some of the educators?
Yes, sir.
It
yes,
is?
Sir. Yes, sir. You know, in the United States, we have 325,000 NPs. In the state of Mississippi, we have around 6,000. And you asked me a question last time I was on here: how many of them are male? Well, about 10%, 10.1 or 6%. Would be males. That's just sort of a rough estimate.
Is that increasing or decreasing or about the same?
That was just the latest figures.
Yeah.
I think it's increasing, tell you the truth, from years ago. It's sort of gradually going up. We're seeing more men in the profession, and we welcome them.
Yeah.
They're wonderful. So I think with the education, we've got to look at them being placed, too. That's another problem, is them being placed in as faculty members and educators within our systems in order to expand their roles too, and maybe draw more into that area, once again increasing the faculty and numbers.
If you want to get into that profession, how many places do we have in the state as far as community colleges or colleges that have that opportunity, that have that curriculum?
For the nurse practitioner curriculum,
yeah.
we have probably, I know we have about 5 universities that have.
Who are they?
The University of Southern Mississippi, from a nurse practitioner program, the University of Southern Mississippi, University of Mississippi at the Medical Center,
Right.
School of Nursing,
UMMC.
Delta State University, Alcorn State University,
University for
Women.
Women.
and University for
Columbus.
Women
Right.
in Columbus.
Any community colleges have entry level?
Not nurse
Now,
practitioners.
entry level for nursing, there's the associate degree programs, but
Or wait a minute. Can you go just strictly from, let's say, not being a nurse to nurse practitioner?
No.
So you got to go through.
we'll let Carolyn speak to that educational
ahead.
track.
For a nurse practitioner, you have to have a 4-year nursing degree first.
What about experience?
You need to have at least 1,000 hours of practice experience before you can come into the nurse practitioner program, which equates to approximately at least a year. We want them to have more, and we did a survey, and it shows that most nurse practitioners have at least, the average is about 5 years experience before they come back to school.
Now, just so people will understand this, and a lot of people still get them confused, what can a nurse practitioner do that a registered nurse cannot do?
We can diagnose patients, we can treat patients, and we can prescribe that are regular.
So you can write the prescriptions out.
Yes, sir.
And is there a statement of official statement as far as the bill moving through, or maybe moving through as far as medical marijuana, because you guys would be inclusive of that?
Well, the medical marijuana bill, even if a bill passes through from a prescribing standpoint, we can't prescribe medical marijuana.
I'm not talking about, can you write the certification?
That's all.
card.
That will all depend on the bill and how the bill is written.
Well, it is in the bill now, isn't it, so far?
Yes.
It can be
It
taken
is.
out, of course, but
It is, and so that would we'd have to refer to our regulatory board to see how that would be governed from a regulatory standpoint for us. So we have a great regulatory board with the Mississippi Board of Nursing, and so they regulate our practice. And so we would have to defer back to them from a regulation standpoint, even though it may be in the bill that would give us that right. We would still have to refer back to our regulatory agency.
I'm just guessing here, but Ann, I wouldn't think any of the members are objecting to that. I mean, if it's something else they could add to the arsenal, I would think they'd be okay with that.
I think you have mixed feelings on that. But if it is something that can help individuals like children with seizures, medicine can help with that. Oncology patients, it can help with that. So we're not against anything helping to subside, some of the
I want to ask you about the traveling nurses and let's talk about the income as far as when a nurse starts and nurse practitioner, and also what these traveling nurses are making, and we'll talk all about that. The Mississippi Association of Nurse Practitioners, the roundtable this morning. We thank Ann and also Carolyn Robert. All right, let's get back to what we were talking about as far as the shortages. Where are we now as far as some of there was a story at LOX that a hospital like Singing River Health Systems in August, Governor Reeves announced more than 1,000 healthcare workers would be deployed to hospitals across the state, including the Singing River, the system's 3 hospitals under a 60-day contract. 60 days later, most of the state contracted Now, MEMA nurses assigned to help fill those gaps will work their last day this week, meaning Singing River will lose about 70 contracted workers. Where is that now? Do we know where the contract is or anything about that?
I really don't have the information. That's RNs. We only work with information concerning the NPs.
There were no nurse practitioners under contract?
Yes, that is a little more challenging than putting RNs under contract. And there was one incident that I was specifically aware of. When FEMA and MEMA, they bring in nurse practitioners, even though they come in under a federal contract, they still have to have a collaborating physician in Mississippi. And there was one that was not able to work because she was a FEMA contract that came into a hospital up north, and she could not work because she did not have a collaborating physician. The contract group that was this is an emergency department area. The contracting physician group was not. They did not know her, which is understandable. That she was not employed by their company, so they did not want to serve as the collaborating physician for her.
I'm a little confused here because if let's just say she wanted to fill that post as a registered nurse, she would be overqualified. I'm not going to say overqualified, but she's got. Why couldn't she just step down a level and become a registered? She's still a registered nurse.
Yes,
right.
I think the need at that point in time, why they brought them in, was they needed another provider.
So she can't use her practitioner
but
because
she could not have functioned as a nurse practitioner. She could have functioned as an RN.
So some of her what she was normally able to do, she could not do.
Correct.
That would be writing prescriptions, etc.
Prescriptions, diagnosis, and treatment.
I got it. So we got 6,000. We have 6,000 nurse practitioners in our state. What's the starting salary when you get out of school and
Well, the average salary is around $110,000. I think it just depends on what area you're in. Some of them may get a little bit more than that. I do know some of the RNs with their incentive bonuses and their boost in the amount they're being paid make pretty close to that, if not better than that in some areas. So it's pretty competitive between the two right now.
What is as far as the traveling nurse? We heard $165,000 or something of that sort. So,
well, the traveling nurse would be the registered nurse. In the state of Mississippi, the traveling nurse would be the RNs. There's a compact.
I understand that, but they're not. If you're just on the job full time in Mississippi, you're not called a traveling nurse.
Right, exactly. You're going out of state.
So, in that the traveling, because there is a shortage, it's a competition for the commodity, which is RN. It's a great time to be in the nursing profession. From a payment standpoint, I mean, if you look across, and you have states, all 50 states competing for nurses and needing nurses. And so, I mean, a travel nurse, you get ads all the time that came across that you go into Oregon, $8,000 a week as a travel nurse. So, I mean, you do the math, $8,000 a week times 4.
Do some of these hospitals put in other amenities such as housing or things such as that, as far as you know? Or?
Travel agencies usually, it's part of the travel deal. If you become a travel nurse, you're going to get housing. They're going to either give you a stipend for housing. Wow. They'll give you a stipend for housing or provide you for housing, and you get stipends.
And we got into radio.
And let me
Plus, they get mileage, too.
Let me also add.
Do they?
Yes, they do.
To add to that now, we do have a problem with the nurse practitioners traveling, too, because they can travel overstate to the states that don't have collaboration. I mean, they don't require that contract. And because I have had to certify so many nurses in other states right now, they're sending me all kind of, from the school standpoint, we have to verify their education. And I've had to do so many verifications for the nurse practitioners to travel outside of the state.
So are we losing some nurse practitioners because of that? In other words, if Hawaii calls and said, no, we'll pay for the fare, we got the room and board, and we got the collaboration deal taken care of, would you like to come?
Right.
Yes.
They get an incentive plus all the pay.
There are now 20. Delaware was the last state to enact full practice authority. There are now 24 states plus the District of Columbia that have full practice authority for nurse practitioners.
Was there a bill in the last legislative session to take care of that?
For the full practice and do away with the collaborative? Yes, sir, there was a bill. House Bill 1303.
We talked about that bill, but that did include it did not include other nurses coming in to be exonerated from that.
No,
not at all.
If you come into the state of Mississippi, you would have
reciprocal.
Right.
No,
we do not have. There would have to be.
board.
they would have to be licensed through the Mississippi Board of Nursing in order to practice. They couldn't just drive across.
Will you guys do it again this year as far as the 2022 session to push for that?
We are definitely entertaining the idea. We do have some promises and some talking points out there with various legislators and both Senate and both the representatives. Those that I've talked to have been very positive about our bill that we want, and so we're hoping that one goes through, but we're not assured.
I don't want to play devil's advocate on here, but I'm just thinking if that did happen this year, and along with the medical marijuana, then you got people setting up shops in, I don't know, everywhere from Benoit to whatever, the Gallo to Bay Springs, and they also are able to do that as far as writing scripts.
I don't think you're going to see a rash of, if you got full practice authority, nurse practitioners open clinics. One, it's very expensive. It's not. It's a business. You have to know a business plan. You're operating a business. You're becoming a provider as well. You have to pay staff. You have, all the things that go with it. So it's not likely that you'd start seeing clinics opening up everywhere, just because it's very expensive. And everybody that is a practitioner doesn't want to own their own business. They don't want to run a business, and that many work for organizations.
Carolyn, we spent a lot of time talking about all the great things of traveling nurses. Give me some negatives to sour this a little bit, to bring it back to level. What are some of the negatives as far as travel nurses? Do you have to commit for a specific period of time that
you do have to commit for?
Does that vary from 6 weeks to 10 weeks or whatever it happens to be?
It varies for whatever time period that contract is for.
What's normal out there?
I think 6 months.
There's contracts now as low as 4 weeks, but up to 13 weeks and up to 24 weeks. So I mean, everyone is a little different, depending on the need of where they're going and the company that you're working with on what they require.
Is there an outfit out there that does this, books traveling nurses? I'm sure that there is. In other words, you would contact them. There's a source that does that.
There's staffing groups available out there, but they also, if they get a list of your names and your emails, they do send that out too, and you get.
And somewhere on the internet, there's a list that you guys go to showing where all the positions are that they could go to.
Yes, or you're going to, if they get your email, you're just going to get an email list that they're going to send you, hey,
you get it
great opportunity here, and this is what we're paying.
It's almost like a bidding war, shipping wars out there.
Right now it is.
That's amazing.
They can pay a couple $1,000s and get that list from our state, so I'm sure that they're using that throughout the nation.
You had asked Carolyn about the negatives of it. I mean, if you're gone from home, if you have other responsibilities, someone has to take care of those. If you decide to go travel, you never really establish. I think in the travel world, you never really establish a work family. Yeah. You're there, you come in, you're there, you leave, and you never get vested, and that becomes a challenge for organizations
as far as retirement's concerned.
Or you never buy into the organization.